Sorry, I had a weird notification. Right. Yeah, thank you everybody for being here. Today is a very special session for this residency, for this archival residency and exhibition project. We have Monisha Behal with us. Benbi has been this key figure in a way in development in the development of this project. She was the first person who had welcomed this idea, who had approached with just I don't know, just some fleeting thoughts about something to be done, and then it was actually in constant conversation and collaboration with Benba that this project has developed to what it is today. Monisha Behal Benba, she's a social development activist working for the social and economic development of women and communities in the Northeast India for the past decades. She's the founding member of Northeast Network, and she has initiated several programs based in all across the Northeast region, out of which Nagaland is one of the programs that has developed to a very vast spreading project actually in Nagaland. Maybe I will introduce all the participants to Benba shortly. So as the participants, as the residents of the project, we have Chingrani Shimre here she's a visual artist and researcher based in Manipur with a degree in textile design from NIT Ahmedabad. She has been researching and documenting the traditional textiles of the Tangkhul Naga tribe. Then we have Akhu Chingambam. Akhu is a singer and songwriter from Imphal. He leads the Imphal-based folk rock act called the Imphal Talkies, and he's a grantee of the India Foundation for Arts from Bangalore. Third, we have Labdyang CM. Labdyang is a theatre artist based in Shillong. She received her training from the National School of Drama, New Delhi, and Comedia School, Copenhagen. She has been writing, devising, and performing scripts inspired by the Khasi folklore and oral narratives, reinterpreting and adapting them to a contemporary context. Our next practitioner is Pranami Rajbangshi. Pranami's practice lies in the juncture of photography, design, research, and writing. She is interested in the politics of gender and identity, often drawn out from her own lived experiences. She's currently pursuing her master's in design from National Institute of Design, Gandhinagar. Our final resident is Rituparna. Rituparna is a queer rights activist, poet, storyteller, and development sector worker from Assam. And as the curator of this whole project, we have Kumam with us. Kumam has been associated with the project since January this year, and he will be working as the curator. He has co-founded an anthological conversational platform called the Chinky Homo Project and runs the Matai Society in Imphal. And so that's all about us. And then you have me and Rishikesh, the people from Northeast Lightworks, who have been trying to make sense out of this project. And okay, I will stop now and I will pass the stage to you. Monisha, please.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I thought we would introduce the subject of you spoke to me some months back, but I understand you must have talked to everybody already. So what I want to first say is a bit of a submission, because I'm not at all very familiar with theatre, with photography. I advocate all this very much, especially amongst young people. But my expertise lies with some concerns that I had about, rural women, and my expertise lies gradually it came to how we should work with them, because I was a young woman when all this started way back in the 80s, 81 or 82. Some of you could not have been born even then. But what I really want to say is things have changed a lot now. I will just start with what I understand is the women's movement. Many of you must be knowing about it. And my knowledge of the women's movement actually comes from the time when I was, when I got a small little job as a researcher for Assam, but in Delhi, with an organization called Center for Women's Development Studies. And we started this organization actually.
Ben, we've lost your voice.
Now?
Yeah, better, Ben.
Yes, yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. So the history of how I got into the women's thing is that I just worked with
Ben, we lost your voice again. I think every time you sit back, we lose your voice.
so I should sit how?
I think how you are now. Exactly how you are now.
So I shouldn't move, you're saying.
Something like that. But when you're very close to the
Oh.
computer, we can hear you. Then we lose you as soon as you sit back.
Yes. So it's also telling me to shut up because I'm saying things which are not really meaningful. But anyway, the influence comes from two people, Ila Bhatt and Veena.
Ba, we lost you again. We are sorry, we can't hear you.
Ben, put off your camera if it'll help. I'm lip reading you. Huh. Ben, we can't hear you at all.
Should I go somewhere else?
Now I can hear you.
I'll go outside to the veranda.
Ben, just see.
What about now?
It's perfect now. I can hear your voice now.
That means okay, just a minute.
Huh.
And just okay.
You can switch on the video. There was no problem with your video, only the sound.
Okay. Is it okay now? Yeah. Just a minute.
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Yes. So I knew very little about the issues of women, and I think the reason is because we came from a very protected family, well, close-knit family, and we were never made aware of what's going on till I started working with these women in Delhi. And the whole thing comes about around three issues. One is that of domestic violence, which I couldn't even believe it happens. I didn't even believe it till I started reading about it and what happens in India. There's a very famous book which came out, and Veena Mazumdar was the person who brought it out. And it started with this thing called the Committee for the Status of Women, 1970. And this book came out called Towards Equality. Till today, it's very important. If you read through the pages, you'll see what are the problems that women face. In that, Towards Equality, they spoke less of violence, but they spoke about many other things. So we have all kinds of issues which address the needs of women, and it's to do with income, it's to do with the absence of income, it's to do with proverbs that you find which are against women. We find that with Manipur, Nagaland, Meghalaya, everything. Assamese proverbs, dangerously reveals how a woman should be put in place. And if there was an Assamese woman here, she would have been able to quote it. But these are the things. But then you also know that abroad too, whether it's Europe or America, they have these kind of proverbs about women. Even if you go into music, if you look at Cole Porter's music or anything, is highly sexist. So you are a different generation of people, but besides enjoying the music that we heard in the 60s and 70s, when you start listening to the words, it's highly sexist, and now things are changing, I think. So this is the way I put it. But the three things that I have to address is this thing of domestic violence. Domestic violence is not just in the form of a husband beating up a woman. It is to do with social violence, economic violence. One example is that of dowry, which Assam does not practice, nor does Meghalaya or Manipur, but it has settled very comfortably in Assam, and people are starting to take dowry, but it's not been announced, publicly that we take dowry. The second thing is about witch hunting, economic violence. Today, there is a couple which has acres of land. The husband dies, and when the husband dies, it is the woman who has to get the property, isn't it? But then what happens is very insidiously, it's almost like an intrigue. The men start planning to take the land away from her because she's become a widow. But instead of saying that now we will take over, they will brand her as a witch. And which means if today a little boy is unwell or little girl has just died in the village, they will say that this woman, because she is a witch, she has cast a spell. So this whole thing is about economic violence, and this is the way we should understand many things in all the states that we belong to in the Northeast. The the third one is about the third one is about emotional violence, where a man who has a drinking habit or a man who is unemployed, he is the one who will say that, whatever you earn, you have to give it to me. And if you do that, then I'll leave you. What will the society say? So to round it off, the entire thing that is going on out here is this thing called patriarchy. And all over the world, we practice patriarchy. I'm very, very unhappy to say that even if Meghalaya is a matrilineal society, we in Northeast Network found terrible cases of child sexual abuse, of abuse by partners on women, husbands to women, etc. And it's one of the highest child sexual abuse. And I thought the church would have some control about it, but when I started talking to people in the different churches, whether it's Roman Catholic, Baptist, the Presbyterians, whoever, they I think took a stand, which they also do in Nagaland. I don't know about Manipur. That we should not think of social control. We should think of spiritual harmonies. The spread of spirituality. So they would ignore the other things, which is to do with domestic violence and all. That's when organizations, whether it's a organization made up of men or women, or feminist organizations, they become very important to us. This is one thing I want to say. And I will switch on to this thing about the movement. In India, the movement started, I would call it, in the 80s, because there was a young little girl, 16-year-old girl, she was, I think she was caught for a theft or something, and she was in the jail, but two constables, they raped her, and they were also acquitted, these two men. That's when about 32 organizations got together, 1980s, I think. I'm sorry, not getting the year right. But I was very much alive and kicking and understanding what was happening. 32 women's organizations came about, and they said that these two men have to put, be booked. And three lawyers fought against it, against the the two policemen, and there was some kind of a justice done, and it's called the Mathura case. If you look up Google again, and that's how I think it all started, where women started going into legislations that there should be an anti-rape law, there should be anti-dowry law, there should be anti-trafficking law, all kinds of legislations came in. Now, what happened parallelly was what was happening in America, Europe, and Spain, and every other place, and that is there was a huge academic concern by academicians who said that it is women who actually contribute to the economy, but they have been put aside, they have not been recognized for their work, and this is something we need to um, we need to what is the word for it? What is the word for it? Bring out percentages of women who are farmers, women who are doing their crafts, who do the cooking, and even if they're doing the cooking, because it falls in the non-monetized economy, they are actually saving a lot of money of that home. So these many feminist literature came out in the late 70s, and one of them being a person called Esther Bosra. She was the first woman to bring out this thing about recognizing women in the economy. Then came from this came the UN concern about giving recognition to women. Many years back, when you people must have been very young, I remember the World Bank had brought out a huge funding for India for farmers, and it was always the men farmers. But then slowly, when the government of India in their sixth plan also brought out the importance of women as farmers in the sixth five-year plan, I remember. So these three things, the government of India giving recognition to women, the United Nations giving recognition to women, and the academic concern, I think these three brought together the recognition that women have to be acknowledged by all. And definitely things have changed a lot. And people like us were actually fortunate. We were very young people then, and we were able to get without anybody putting obstacles against us. We were able to travel in parts of UP, Bihar. At least I did all those kind of researches, and I found UP in a real holy mess, because women are in parda fully in UP, and I was shocked. I was in a district called Mainpuri district. People think it is Manipur, but I was in Mainpuri district, and very near Itawa, Kanpur, and all these places. And the two things that I understood was the way women are kept in parda, number one, the way women are not allowed to speak to men, and the women, if they have to go out for the call of nature, they can only go in the middle of the night. So if you look at the entire development cycle of a little young girl, she was completely tuned to behave the way society wanted her to. I found no difference between a Hindu family or a Muslim family. Let me tell you that. But when I went back to Assam, I said that here half the battle is won. When I went to Manipur, I saw the way women, the Maira Paibis, got together to fight for so many things. And I remember when I went back to Assam and started working, it was, I think, for me a very easy task to collectivize women, because Northeast has got women who always worked in informal collective or cooperative system. For example, the Boro women, they will gather, kilos and kilos of dhan, rice, rice grains, and they would lend it out to very needy people at 50% interest, to tell the needy people that if you're taking this amount of chawal, 5 kilos, then you can give us back 7.5 kilos, that's 50% interest. That was a collective that was working. And then when I started reading more, I found that Indonesian women do the same thing. So the whole stretch of Northeast India, you find that women's farming methods, indigenous way of working is akin to countries like Indonesia, much more than a UP village or a Bihar village. And the difference I found is because women in Northeast are not in parda. So the lesson learned, and at least today I'm saying, because you are all young people, whether it's through the expression of dance, theater, photography, music, literature, or whether it's even through a protest, that's something I don't, because that was my stand from very beginning. I think if you do this as young people, to see that we have the mainstay of women. Women should stay the way they were and have been, and that is without parda, working collectively. And the only thing that I think we should change in Northeast India is that women should change their perspective from needs to rights. It should not be that we only need this, we need this. We have to fend for ourselves. My experience in Manipur was quite something. I went to many places in Manipur much later, in around 2001 to 2004. And when Manorama was killed by the army, I was with the Myra Paibis, and I really struggled hard. Manmohan Singh had become the Prime Minister of India, and a lady from the Planning Commission who came to Manipur. I also, she's a friend of mine called Dr. Saida Hamid. I said, you please get an interview done with these women who, demonstrated without any attire in front of the Kangla fort. And she did that. So 6 women came with me and met with Dr. Saida Hamid and Manmohan Singh. And they said what they had to about the security forces, about the way people have done the killing of boys who they suspect as militants. So that is another part altogether of conflict. And Manmohan Singh, of course, did promise that we will see to it doesn't go, but I don't think much happened. And those were also lessons learned from me, because whatever we did was with a lot of hope. That didn't happen. But hats off to the Myra Paibis. Uh, I worked with them for several months and weeks, and fortunately, when the NEN Resource Center came up in 2005, 2004, 2005, one of the Myra Paibis, she came and she witnessed the opening of that, and I was very happy to have her with us. Uh, but there is one little problem again I find about patriarchy, is that the students' unions and the groups in Manipur, I don't blame them because they were in conflict all the time, but they gave very little recognition to the Myra Paibis by saying it, that these women are elderly and they are not that knowledgeable and they are very emotional. So how can we work with them? And the answer that I had, of course I didn't say it, was that if these women were also in strategic planning committees with the students, with the ministers, I think they would have been, it would have been a different story. So in the face of it, groups of people in Manipur would say that our women are very strong. They are Myra Paibis, they're the torch bearers. They've done this, they've done this. Irom Sharmila, who's doing this, but she's become a complete non-entity. So these are the travails of a patriarchal society. I'll switch to Assam, because Assam had a completely different story. Because of the national movement, a lot of the Assam's citizens had a direct connection with Delhi, with Calcutta, Presidency College. Why do you think they went to Presidency College? Because there was no university in Guwahati. So the first university in Guwahati, when it came up, it was in 1949, much after the independence. So a lot of the wealthy families, learned families, they all went into Calcutta to study, and their connect was with the left, a lot with the left in Calcutta and West Bengal. But I also know because Gandhiji came to Assam in 1920, the two things that happened simultaneously was his expression about the weaving. He gave full recognition to the weaving, to the women about the weaving, and I think it's quoted everywhere that the women of Assam, they weave dreams. They weave dreams for us. And he said that in Assam, he said if the percentage of women in India is 48%. So if 48% of women went into the national movement, then we would have almost 98% people fighting for the movement and not keep the women behind in their homes. Having said that, he also gave a lot of emphasis that women should be good mothers because they are the ones who will be the people to bring up their children, parenthood and all that. But the second thing that happened, which is very luckily for Assamese women, is that the men folk in this whole exhilaration of Gandhism, they allowed their wives to go into the national movement. And, a combination of the absence of parda, the combination of women participating in the national movement, a combination of women being allowed to write about these things, brought out a movement by Assamese women towards the national movement, but something that I respect very much. And if at all I was influenced to continue this kind of work, is because of the women who took a fantastic role in the national movement. But they went a little bit backstage when the women's movement in India, 1980s and all that came, because their whole approach was to be on the welfareist side, stitching, knitting, study circles. They never questioned the inequality between men and women. Today it's different. I think Meghalaya, Manipur, all the states are questioning the issues of inequalities, and I think it's a very dynamic thing that's happening. But I think it could be expressed through photography, through music, through theater, and it should be absolutely expressed uh, through the lot of environmentalists that have come up in recent times about what's happening to our region. And why I'm talking about this is that when Gandhiji came or when we were young, we were never taught about the environment. But now with the degradation of forests, with industries coming up, and with the greening of Northeast, and when I say greening, it's not our natural resources. It is the rubber plantation, it is the palm oil plantations. In fact, tea gardens, I believe, is also something foreign. It might have originated in Assam. I sometimes ask my husband about it. It is indigenous in many ways, but it never came up in hectares and hectares of land. So that is something also we need to think about. It's tea, then rubber plantation, oil plantations, all these things that are coming up. We need to be very sensitive about what is grown locally. And I would also like Tamara to speak here because she's an environmentalist. But my work in all these years has been about bringing women to express these these things about inequality, about the environment. And I have tried very hard to see that men and women also look at filmmaking, photography, theater with a different meaning. Because every theater group that I met when I was a young child was only these Vaishnav plays, jatras, and things like that. But mind you, Assam had fantastic mobile theaters. But they would show films like they would have plays like Titanic, and it was very funny. But the fact that there is a culture of theater in Assam, in Manipur, and Meghalaya started it. I think you're there, Ambia. I think we should encourage all these things. So with this, I'll stop here. But if I hope I've been relevant about everything, and maybe Tamara would like to also speak. She has taken over as the director of Northeast Network, and we are looking forward to her addressing issues of biodiversity and the ecosystem. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. I'll just take a few minutes. Honestly, sometimes I wonder how the hell I'm here. Ben's boots are really large to fill, and I'm not even going to try. I'm going to try just walking a few steps behind her. So bear with me. But I'll just add a few things to what Ben has already mentioned. And what's happening today, from a purely environmentalist point of view, from what we are seeing today in development, is that women are the first to feel the effects of anything, any natural disasters, any climate change effects, and they're the last also. They're also the last ones to get any help. And this is still patriarchy. This is still our governance systems. This is still our society deciding how women are going to uh, live in society. Even today, despite all this wonderful work, and Ben's body of work is immense. She has hardly touched on. She has given you like the tip of the iceberg. When you delve into the archives, as this project goes further and further, you will understand the depth and width of this work, that Ben is talking about. But what's happening today is there are very invisible ways now in which women are still being held under this very aggressive male gaze. And climate change is something that has come from industrialization. It has come very much from anthropogenic, that's human activity, from industrial activity, but it's affecting women the most, and especially women who are from land-based communities. And land-based communities is what most of the Northeast is. Most of the ethnic and tribal peoples, indigenous peoples, live very close to their land. Their culture and traditions are very married to nature and the forests that they have around them. They understand natural cycles really well. And so any small disbalance in the natural cycles affects them directly, and they're the first to get affected. And what's happening with women is because women are the ones who manage resources for the house. Most of the males go out. They'll go off to Delhi and Bangalore and all to find work. They go off to find greener pastures in many senses of that phrase. But it's the women who are left holding the baby literally and figuratively, because the other baby is the land, the other baby is the farming that they have to do, is the food that they have to gather for the family, is the caregiving that they have to do with elders, with children, with extended members of the family, etc., etc. And a lot of NEN's work today is about visibilizing. One is visibilizing this invisible work that is happening with women in land-based communities. And the other, as Ben said, which has been, there, it has been a mandate of NEN's right from the beginning, is for them to be able to articulate their rights, to have a voice. And we found in NEN that collectivizing women's efforts, collectivizing their voices has been the most effective in actually helping them be heard and be seen in terms of all this invisible labor that's happening in the background. Today, Northeast Network is looked, not Northeast Network, not the Northeast as a region is looked at as a cash cow. That is our current paradigm of development. If you look at our current government and what it's trying to do, it's not that suddenly they love the Northeast or they're suddenly very compassionate or empathetic. They've not understood that the virgin forest, the little bit of virgin forest we have, which is providing all these wonderful ecosystem services like fresh water, clean air, the biodiversity, the agro-biodiversity, the resilience that it provides to humans, none of that is in the picture when the central government has turned its gaze to the Northeast. It has only turned its gaze here because the Northeast is extremely mineral rich. It's rich in biodiversity, and it's seen as one of the last places in India where there are these swaths and swaths of green. Also, by pushing a lot of very fancy looking schemes that look really good on paper, not making the farmers or whoever it is aware of the actual impact of these schemes, they are pushing their agenda of oil palm and rubber plantations. Rubber plantations is an old story. You just have to look at Tripura and you'll understand. Tripura has already gone through one cycle of rubber plantations, understood that it's not working, and they're trying very hard to get out of it. It's really hard. In some places, rubber has actually worked. Okay, so let's not, it's done a lot of ecological damage, but in terms of the money, it has worked. So that's a tough one. There are places in Assam that are like this. In terms of oil palm, we don't need to look anywhere else. We just have to look at what has happened before oil palm even came to India. We have to look at Malaysia, we have to look at Indonesia, and see the devastation that has occurred due to oil palm. And yet we insist on relearning this again and again and again. So the only drive here, the only reason the central government has turned its gaze to the Northeast is because we are looked at as a cash cow. And the first to be affected with this very, very slanted, very shallow paradigm of development is women and the youth. Your livelihoods are taken away, your health is taken away. Men can run off, they'll go somewhere else and do whatever they have to. It's the women left looking after the kids, looking after the homes, managing circumstances on the ground. And this is something that Northeast Network's current body of work is trying to address. We are going more and more into making these connections between environment and development, between social work and environment and development, with how we describe our current paradigm of development. Definitely not what our government is doing right now. So I think I'll stop there. And I do have one question, Ben, that I think would be useful for this group. And maybe you can, talk to us a little bit, a couple of minutes on that. And that is about, yes, Pumam, you're right. I'm just reading your message right here. You're absolutely right about women struggling to fetch water. In Nagaland, we've actually seen that they're having to go 1 or 2 villages further now to fetch water. So it's a lot more time consuming, it's energy draining. The kids are not going to school because the mums are having to walk further for water. So they're accompanying their mums and coming back because the mums are not going to be back in time to pick the kids up from school. So there are very far-reaching effects with, water tables going down and, the mismanagement of our resources. There's also one thing, sorry, that I forgot to mention was large infrastructure development projects. And this is to do with dams and roadways and these kinds of things. While they all look very fancy on paper, and we definitely need them. I'm not saying that a remote village does not need to have energy or electricity or a road. That is not my point of view at all. All I'm trying to say is large infrastructure projects, like a huge dam, is definitely not helping because it comes at the cost of many lives, many livelihoods, biodiversity, and land. And we need all 4 of those things. So at the cost of 4 things, we are maybe getting one thing. Maybe we're getting the electricity part of it, right? And there are many, when you dam a river, there are upstream and downstream repercussions for fish life, for human life, for anything connected to that river, which we never look at. So I'm going to stop there. I don't want to keep on this point, but I'll go back to Ben now. And Ben, very quickly, because we're from the Northeast has there's one thing that has set the Northeast apart in terms of the impacts on women from a patriarchal viewpoint, and that is armed conflict. And I'd just like Ben to spend maybe 1 or 2 minutes just explaining or going a little deeper into that with all of us, because I think it's important for all of you as in your practice to understand this, because it will inform some of the manner in which you think about these things when you're going through the residency. So over to you, Ben. Thank you. Ben, we can't hear you again. I think you're on mute.
Yes, I got it. About armed conflict, it's something government doesn't recognize. Okay, the word armed conflict, because in early when we started our work, we started with this issue of conflict, of armed conflict, and they said there's nothing like that exists. There is conflict, but it's not called armed conflict. For them, armed conflict would be something what Ukraine and Russia are doing now. But because we looked at the point of view of women, there are things we did a lot of field work. The first instance was for me was Nagaland, and when I first went into Nagaland, of course I took the wrong bus. I went into going towards Manipur, but we stopped, and when I looked at the people inside the bus, and then when I looked outside, there was not a bird, but on top of trees were these security forces, one or two of them, with their guns just pointing straight to the bus. And it was uncanny. It was an uncanny silence, and it was. I wasn't very scared about anything, because people took it very normally. But these men were also extremely dehumanized, these security people, and therefore they would go and do things out of the blue. Whether if they drank too much, they would go and rape a woman, they'll do something. My own colleagues in Seno, they had the butt of a gun right here and said, turn this way, turn there. Where is your father? Those kind of experience we saw. And when I was in Mon, I was in a little house, and the security forces were running, and I was wondering what it was. I said, what's happening? They said, no, our boys are in that house. So then I also realized that when armed conflict takes place, the origin of armed conflict is about the lack of understanding between the state and the people. So there are many examples of the way people in Manipur, Nagaland, Assam have felt this sense of alienation. Why did the Alpha want some sovereign Assam? Why did Manipur talk about the dubious merger that it had with India? Why did Nagaland talk about this, where suddenly they went and killed people? So that is armed conflict. Where it affected women, because we studied that really hard, is multiple. I mean, it will take a long time. But the principal things that I found about women was that when women went to do the agriculture work, there were no men. Normally, Arunachal, when I went in 68 to Arunachal, I went to Tawang. I was a young, very young then, about 15 or 16. It was men and women would work together, and they would sing together to make it more pleasurable. That thing I didn't see in Nagaland. The men were completely missing, and they were missing because no way could they be saved. Even if they were innocent, they would be killed. So it's the women who went in the morning. They went and did that. They went early morning, but they would come back at 12 o'clock, because 12 o'clock noon, security forces would come. So there were people who got killed during the crossfire, in house searches and things like that. But I could not figure out how in the defense ministry they could not have a dialogue with women's groups, so that we could talk about it and things like that. And on the other side, the militants also, sorry, but they were no better. They had no regard for women at all. They just wanted their sovereign Assam and sovereign Nagaland and whatever. And they could not believe that women can come to the table, for strategic planning, to do things. And then there was Roshmi Goswami, one of my friends. She has written a document about the militants, the girls who became militants. two things stand out for all women I've seen, whether it's Nepal or whether it is Manipur or whether it's Assam. These girls got out of this their society to find something adventurous and also for a cause. But a lot of girls said that we don't like to do housework, so we join the militant group. But there again, there was a sort of a gender division there, because they would become the carriers. They would send messages from one house to the other. They would spy on something, etc. And they really never became people who were really armed and doing things for a cause. One or two women did, they were trained to hold the rifle, revolver, whatever. But at the end of it, when people were caught, they had these rehabilitation centers, and women and men, they were given some rations plus 3,000 rupees, etc. And it became extremely a sordid affair for people to stay in these rehab centers, because men would also slowly try and leave and work somewhere, like Tamara is saying. But I don't want to generalize everything, because there was a lot of suffering, and definitely each state had different issues. But the general trend is that of women being completely sidetracked, even if they were there, and there was no regard for women about their health care. You know, when I was in Chizami, and if a woman was expecting, she would be taken by bus, one of the village development board buses, to Kohima. And sometimes then the doctor would, look at her there. But during the militancy time, when I did a study in Chizami, the health status was terrible. There was a lot of maternal mortality. There's a lot of maternal mortality in Assam too. It's very, very bad. Things are different now, and I think the only way that we are connecting now is the social media, whether it's WhatsApp or everything. So things have changed a lot, and therefore again it becomes very, very important for young people to make use of the social media. And I would also think something that I missed out in the beginning of my talk. I mean, Devadip met me and he said, Ben Baido, we want to do this, this, this. So I said, yeah, you go and go to people's homes in Assam and collect all the black and white photographs of women who were in the national movement. Because that time the photographs had come up, I myself, my parents have a lot of photographs of those kind of things. And but somebody, I think, was saying that no, that is a different one. But now we need to archive something else, and about people, about the environment and things. So we'll go along with that. But I think one should not ignore the archival value of, Meghalaya, Assam. Assam was, of course, with Meghalaya till 1970s. So, but still, we will have a lot of photographs. Manipur, in particular, lots of black and white pictures will come out. So, it's very important to uphold the archival value of the Northeast.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Bilba, for addressing the session today. It was, yeah, as always, it was such a pleasure to hear you speak. I would just want to ask the people if someone wants to present a question to Benby or to have some sort of discussion, please, you're welcome.
As usual, me. So I think there was indeed a lot to digest and a lot to kind of look deeper, through the residency and also through various archives and museums and museums that are out there, including NEN. So while there is obviously going back in time, trying to understand the women's movement in its various forms, in all these regions and communities, through Monisha's work, through other women's work, through other women collectives' works, right? So there's a lot to kind of go back and take that long detour and get a glimpse of how did we reach here. So I think that is very much sort of well noted, that there is a lot to kind of go back and understand the legacy and the processes. So while there is that, and there's also obviously it's also an established fact that certain forms of violence, certain forms of inequalities had existed and had been identified. So drawing from there, also the kind of violence that's been the violence and inequality that has been inflicted on women, and how I also want to think in terms of who am I and where I come from and which fraternity do I come from. The fact that I'm part of this residency, being a cis man, who identifies as a queer person, and like I highlighted in my session previously as well, um, so there is an alliance that has been kind of seemingly formed somewhere among with the feminist and the queer movement somewhere. However, it's a work in progress, because it's come from two different communities. But what is the shared experience among the feminist and women fraternity and the queer trans fraternity? What is that shared experience that kind of brought us together? So for me and also some of the people that I work with, what has really been the answer to that is that somewhere, somehow, femininity as such, this embodiment of being a woman, being feminine, be it about cis women, cis women who embody that, or be it trans women who embody that femininity in their expression, be it queer men who also embody that femininity in their own ways. And somehow that femininity kind of have been the very ground on which violence had been inflicted, you know, be it rape or molestation or exclusion. And I think so given the kind of work that NEN has done over the years, the communities it has worked, and I'm saying this without even going through the archives, I'm sharing this just from the sharings I've had with people here, and also the little, reading that I've done online on NES website. So this experiences of violence on the basis of femininity on which it is being inflicted. So then can we also talk about when we talk about women's movement, and the way forward, can we also how do we also increasingly talk about this shared alliance, across the spectrum of cis women, of trans women, of queer people, on which such and such gender-based violence and inequalities have historically and continue to be, inflicted on. And that I think in a way I'm also trying to validate my very presence in this group, wherein, okay, I don't embody a cis woman's lived experience, but what is that allows me to kind of work in this space, and build that solidarity. So yeah, that was what I had in mind. Thanks.
Yeah, I will say, I just want to tell you from the beginning, in the 80s, when we were working about this whole issue of women's development. It was called women's development, then it became gender and development. And, there are these different schools of thought. And at the time when the whole issue of sexual rights came up, that was the time that when you look at feminist groups, a lot of them did not adhere to that at all. They talked only about the emancipation of women from a very, very rotten lives that they have spent. But there were other very radical feminist groups who said, no, this is the way we can work. where we have to build alliances. With Northeast Network, we started the sharing uh, phase some years back, and our policy in beginning, when we brought out our mission of work and objectives and all that, now it is different because we have built up this uh, uh, alliance building with different groups other than just men and women, and we are very 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 sensitive about that. And I'm sure we asked Ritu Parno to come last year to a place outside Guwahati, and he introduced this whole thing about the what he calls the otherness in Assamese to groups, to about 30 women's groups, not groups, 30 women from different villages, Assamese villages. And they were not taken aback. I thought they would. And they said, "Do you know, Baidu, we have a young person and their parents are in denial. They lock that person up. Baidu, in that village, this is happening, but everybody laughs at him." This kind of a thing was going on. So we were in getting Ritu Porno here to this gathering. Not only NEN was addressing something to the world, in our little world, and to our women who we work with all the time, but it is also to bring them out of their inhibitions. The work is going on, and I'm completely with you in what you're saying, but I think it's going to take some time. And I remember 1995 when the Beijing conference took place. I didn't go to Beijing, it was the fourth World Women's Conference. And at that time, there were groups in from Delhi and Calcutta who talked about the whole issue of sexuality, and the freedom of sexuality. At that time, the language was different. It was not called, LGBT and things like that. It was called lesbianism, and it was called homosexuality. Then it became gay. And so different terms, just like you have different terms for disability. Okay. And so I remember the very elderly women, Ilabha's age, they were saying, but why are these, what is wrong with these girls? Why are they asking about this? How can it be same sex? They couldn't even figure out that this was happening. I'm coming from there actually, 1990s, when the women were shocked that we were doing this. So when NEN introduced this whole thing of it, we had to do it by explaining and not being confrontationist. That, hey man, you have to do this. This is the way we are, because then we would be branded as uh, you know uh, uh, what is the word for it, irrational feminists or something like that. You have to talk about it, you have to bring somebody there, so that they can get familiar. And this is the way we have always liked to work. And I really welcome you, Kumam, that you have spoken this about this. And there is quite a long way to go, but thankfully for this Supreme Court Supreme Court, what is the word for it? Um, Declaration about gay rights, LGBT rights, and things like that. So I think a lot of people are now understanding what's happening, and I think it will we have a better future on that score, definitely. But unfortunately, Meghalaya, um, 3 years back, there was this young boy who used to dress up as a girl. He was murdered, and they put on a girl's dress on him, and it was a very vicious murder. And these kind of things are happening in some parts of Shillong, but I don't know. I think it was unusual. I didn't even follow it up. I don't know what happened about it. Maybe Lapjang might know about it.
Yeah, I remember about it. Not much also because I don't think I was here in Shillong at that time. But yes, these isolated sort of incidents do continue to happen, and there's still so much we are behind, in sort of addressing this, and especially the violence and the abuse and the exclusion, as Kumar was saying, that comes.
I think in the
comes
case
with
of
it.
Meghalaya, I think it's religiosity that and the spirituality that has become the line of thought everywhere, and therefore, when a Khasi woman is impregnated by a partner, and he leaves her, she gets a baby from him, and he's gone, and then she actually goes and gets married. There are cases where those husbands have sexually, abused the offspring of that woman, or the child of that woman, and therefore, I feel in Meghalaya there is a lot of discussion to take place about sexuality, about certain issues of rights, reproductive and sexual rights, and despite it being a matrilineal society. That's where the danger is.
Yes,
It's a huge danger, and
exactly.
it's very sad because even Saint Anthony is the head of Saint Anthony. I talked to him. I think they said, madam, we go for spirituality and anything. So we need to talk about that. And I think, are you Lahun's cousin?
Yes, I am. I'm
Yeah.
Lahun's cousin.
Okay.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
You came
Yeah.
lovely work in Guwahati, I think, once for us, Northeast Network.
Yes,
Thank you.
yes. I had been. Thank you so much, Ben, ma'am, or Kong, if I can call you Kong.
Yeah, yes.
uh, but you're
Kong,
very.
the Ba in Meghalaya is brother or something, or a man, right? Ben Ba. Ba.
Yes.
Ba is
Ba
brother.
in Meghalaya is
Yeah,
brother.
and
Yeah.
somewhere else, Kong is like King Kong. So you can call me Ben Ba, Kong, King, nothing. Doesn't matter. It doesn't, it's just like what Shakespeare said about what's in a name. Same thing. Yeah.
Yes, true. Yes. No, thank you so much. I'm so happy to have had this session with you. And, you've pointed out very very real issues that still need to be addressed, that and especially here in Meghalaya, you're so right about the church being this institution that sort of dictates the social life of people. I mean, just the fact that even now, some of my friends would say, we will go to the church for counseling, the
Oh,
priests will counsel us.
no, not a good
We
idea.
go for confession and this. And I realize definitely not, because what they teach then, as you said, they focus on spirituality, they focus on religion, but they don't address aspects of what our households, our communities, our clans are actually going through.
Yeah.
And it's so terrible sort of to be under this garb of matrilineal, to say, oh, we're a matrilineal culture, so we have these rights. But I think it's so important to really critically examine, what have we become? Is it just this mask that we put on, and behind this, so much is happening, so much of injustice and violence and abuse that continues to happen in our communities is really, really terrible.
I know. There has to be a lot of, I think, intellectual discourse, not in the very formal way, but a lot of discussion has to take place in Shillong with young groups, and then
Yeah.
it might work better in like that. I don't know if it is the absence of a struggle that has made people like this, because in Manipur, people have struggled throughout. I remember in
Yes.
2004, I was staying in that hotel Nirmala, and there was a lot of problems going on there. But I kept meeting young people, and the one thing that came out, they say from completely black waters, a little lily comes up and bright things come up. I found that young boys and girls were doing fantastic photography, bringing out clips um, of the conflict that was going on. and that is the time also Hindi movies had stopped. Only Korean movies were being shown in the Manipur, televisions. But out of that came these young people who became journalists, who became filmmakers, and it all comes out because there has been a struggle. And I always
Yeah.
find out that these kind of movements come up only because of a struggle. Meghalaya needs to struggle through a youth movement about this whole issue,
Yes.
but it will be a
Yes.
problem. And
Yes.
therefore, in a very non-confrontationist way, you guys do things, and we can. I'm sure we can express it in different ways. It's very important.
Mm-mm. Yeah. Yeah. That's true. That's something I've also been thinking a lot about. Is it, the sort of being comfortable in this space, creating a bubble and being comfortable, and this lack of struggle of coming together and saying, let's come
Yeah.
together as a collective and speak out and struggle. At the moment, it seems a lot of times, I think every time
Yeah.
I come back home, I feel like, am I back into a bubble? And, how do I break out of this? Or what do I question? What do I um, try to challenge? It's always that,
Yeah.
definitely.
I think a lot of women's organizations in the past have used strategies. And when I say strategies, that in Bihar, Madhubani, Darbhanga, these places, women are so much swamped in Parda and all that, that whenever we had a meeting with women, the men would say that all these women from the urban areas have come to spoil our women. But when you started calling the men also, and they realized that this is something very different, then we talk about different things. And then later, when they get confidence in you, then they allow you to talk to the women alone. I think we should have strategies like that about people in a lot of young men in Meghalaya are not in favor of matrilini. They are not in favor of many things. They're not looking at the church. So I think there are many issues we can talk about later on.
Mm.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. I think if we have more questions, we can bring it forward, or if not, then I think we can also call it a night. It's been a very long, intense session with a lot of loaded discussions,
Yes.
and yeah, yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Benva, for making time for this. For this residency, for the session, and I'm very excited to see how the month of April shapes this project, and also how in the month of May, how does the residency and the exhibition look like finally, what comes out, and what is the exchange that happens between NEN's work and visual art contemporary practitioners,
Mhm.
and then how does the whole conversation look like in a city like Guwahati or in a city like Shillong when it travels from here to there. And that's it.
I, I think the only suggestion I can give to you is that use this discussion as the springboard from where each individual can bring out his or her ideas, or if it in Rituparna or Kamam, if you have any ideas, we can discuss it with Devadip and then go on with it. But I think this rummaging around for old photographs is not the point right now. It'll be different, isn't it?
This is just a project we are doing with Tejpur. I think there's really something to look about at it. It is a treasure house of memory in the form of like to
Oh, yeah,
see.
Manipur will have the Myra Pibes. They were also young girls, you know.
Yeah, a lot
Years
of
back. You will get photos there. It's
yeah,
important because Manipur is more in the world map than Assam is.
yeah,
Remember that because they struggled, the women.
yeah. Yeah, it's a long process. It's a long route ahead. All right. Thank you. Thank you, people. Thank you,
Okay,
everybody.
bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Benba.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.